The marketplace was full of noise, but around her there was only emptiness. People walked past quickly, covering their faces, whispering cruel words, and sometimes even laughing. She sat near the broken stone wall, knees pulled close to her chest, hair tangled, skin covered in dirt and sweat. No one wanted to come close to her. The reason was not a secret. Her body carried a strong smell, a smell so sharp and unpleasant that even passing merchants held their breath when they crossed her path. Children threw stones, women pulled their skirts away, and men shouted at her to leave, but she had nowhere to go. Her name was Lyra. Once she was part of a proud alien clan, but she had been cast out. A disease in her skin glands had cursed her with the smell. Her people believed it was shameful. They called her cursed, unclean, unworthy of love. Alone, she wandered from village to village, never staying longer than a night, because every time she tried to rest, people forced her away. Now she lived here, at the edge of the human trading outpost, where ships came and went, and where the galaxy's poorest came to sell what little they had. She watched the crowd with tired eyes. The smell that pushed others away was invisible to her own nose. She only saw their disgust, their fear, their anger. Every morning, she hoped someone might look at her differently, maybe offer food or water. But every morning, her hope broke again. People came with coins in their hands for traders, but never for her. They gave charity to beggars, but when their eyes landed on her, they turned away as if she was not a living creature. Once, in the early dawn, a group of guards had tried to chase her away from the gates. They shouted that her smell would bring down the value of the market, the stuff that customers would stay away. She begged them to let her stay, just one corner, just one shadow where she could sit quietly. They hit her with sticks until she crawled to the stones outside the wall. She had no strength to fight, and her voice cracked until no sound came out. That night she had curled on the ground, shaking from cold, believing she would not wake again. But she always woke, and every day was the same. Traders, merchants, guards, strangers, all of them passed her like she was nothing. Sometimes they called her the stinking one, sometimes the cursed girl. She stopped listening. She stopped speaking. She became like a shadow, sitting still, letting the days pass over her like dust. Yet on this day, something changed. She felt it first not with her eyes, but with her heart. Someone stopped walking. Usually footsteps hurried past, but this time they paused near her. She looked up slowly, expecting to see another guard ready to push her away. Instead, she saw boots, worn but strong, not polished like the merchants. She raised her gaze and saw a man, tall and human, staring down at her with no sign of disgust on his face. His eyes did not narrow, his mouth did not twist in anger. He only looked calm, curious, and strangely gentle. Lyra's body tensed. She pressed herself harder against the wall, afraid he would strike her or spit at her. That was what always came after someone stopped, but he did not move. He simply stood there, his shadow falling over her small frame, while the crowd continued to flow around them. People hissed at him to move away, to not stand near her, but he ignored them. His attention was fixed on her alone. The air grew heavy. Lyra's breath quickened, and she whispered, almost without voice, "Go, leave." She had learned it was better to drive people away before they hurt her. But he did not leave. He crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and low. "You look like you haven't eaten for days." The words startled her. Not cruel words, not commands. Just a simple observation, spoken as if he saw her as a person. Her heart pounded in confusion. No one had spoken to her like that in years. She lowered her eyes, too afraid to meet his. The man reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of bread. He placed it on the ground between them, not touching her, not forcing her to take it, only waiting. Lyra stared at the bread, her hands shaking. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but suspicion kept her frozen. She thought it might be a trick, but his expression did not change. He only nodded once, and his eyes said, "It's yours." The marketplace around them grew louder, people laughing at the scene, mocking him for wasting food on the cursed one. Yet, he did not rise, did not turn to them. His presence was steady, like a wall between her and the cruelty of the crowd. For the first time in years, she felt something strange in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but the faint memory of it. Her fingers finally reached out, trembling, and took the bread. She lifted it close, sniffed it, then bit into it like a starving animal. Tears filled her eyes as she chewed, not because of the food, but because someone had given it to her freely. The man watched in silence, his eyes steady, his face patient. He said nothing more, but his silence carried weight, a promise unspoken. And in that silence, as she swallowed each bite, Lyra realized this man was not like the others. He had not run from her. He had not laughed. He had not hurt her. He had stopped. He had seen her. And that small act felt more powerful than all the cruelty of the years before. The crowd moved on, but the world had already shifted. Something had begun, and it was not small. It was the first crack in the walls of her exile, the first light breaking into her darkness. And though she did not yet understand it, Lyra's story was about to change forever. The bread was gone, but the taste stayed with her, warm and real. Lyra wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and kept her eyes low. She expected the man to rise and leave like everyone always did after giving pity. But he did not stand. He still crouched near her, his boots planted firmly, as if the ground itself belonged to him. The voices around grew sharper, warnings, insults, laughter, but he ignored them all. His hand moved again, and this time he pulled a small flask of water. He unscrewed the cap and set it on the stone between them. Her throat burned at the sight. Days had passed since she had tasted clean water. Her fingers reached out, then stopped halfway. She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes, waiting for a trick, a cruel laugh, some condition hidden behind the offer. But his face was steady. He did not smile, did not frown, only gave a small nod that said, "It's yours if you want it." She took the flask with shaking hands and drank. The water slid down her throat like fire at first, then like relief, cooling the emptiness inside her. Tears pressed behind her eyes, but she swallowed them down. She would not cry in front of him. Not yet. When she lowered the flask, she finally dared to speak. Her voice was broken, like a string that had snapped long ago. Why? Why are you here? It was not a real question. She expected no answer, only silence or mockery. But the man answered softly, because everyone else turned away. His words made her chest tighten. She looked at him quickly, searching for lies in his eyes, but saw none. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Leave her, human. She'll rot your skin off with her stink." Laughter followed. The man finally turned his head toward them. His gaze was sharp, so sharp the laughter died at once. He rose slowly, his full height casting a long shadow over her. For the first time, she saw him clearly. His hair was dark, his jaw rough, his clothes simple but strong. He carried no fancy weapons, only the calm strength of someone who had seen storms before and did not fear another. He extended a hand toward her. The gesture froze her in place. Her mind screamed not to take it. Every time she had trusted, she had been hurt. Every time she had hoped, it was crushed. Her fingers dug into her own arms as she shook her head. "No," she whispered. Don't touch me." The shame of her own smell burned her skin like fire. The man did not lower his hand. He only said, "Then walk beside me. You don't have to touch." His voice held no pity, only quiet certainty. He turned slightly, enough to show he would wait, but not force. The choice was hers. Lyra stared at his back, her chest rising and falling in panic. She wanted to crawl deeper into the wall, vanish into shadow, but something inside her trembled with a new kind of fear, the fear of losing this strange chance. The crowd whispered, eager to see her reject him, eager to see the human mocked for wasting time. But slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up. Her legs wobbled, unused to standing so long, but she managed. The crowd hissed when the wind carried her smell across them, some pulling scarves over their faces, others cursing. The man did not flinch. He began to walk, slow steps, not looking back. Lyra followed, one step, then another, her eyes on the ground. Every inch felt like dragging a chain, every breath filled with shame. But she followed. For the first time in years, someone had not abandoned her after seeing her. That fragile thread of kindness pulled her forward. They passed the market gates together, the guards glaring but silent under the man's steady look. Beyond the noise of the crowd, the path grew quieter. Lyra's heart beat hard, unsure of what awaited her. She whispered so softly he almost did not hear, "You will regret this." The man slowed but did not stop. "Maybe," he said, "but not today." His words echoed in her mind, louder than the marketplace jeers, and though doubt gnawed at her, her feet kept moving. The outcast had been seen, and now she walked beside the only one who dared not turn away. The small shelter stood at the edge of the outpost, hidden between broken stone walls and old metal sheets that once belonged to a fallen ship. The man pushed the door open, and the hinges creaked like a warning. Inside, the air was cooler, dim light filtering through holes in the roof. There was no wealth here, no luxury, only a place that felt away from the world's cruel eyes. For Lyra, it was already more than she had known in years. She stopped at the doorway, clutching her thin arms around herself. Her body trembled with uncertainty. No one had ever taken her anywhere but to throw her out. Her heart whispered that this was a trap, that he would laugh and humiliate her once the door closed. But his voice was steady when he said, "Come in. No one will bother you here." He did not push, only waited. Slowly, she stepped inside. The man walked to a corner where a water tank stood, patched with welded lines. He turned a valve, and a weak stream flowed into a small basin. Lyra's breath caught at the sight of water running freely. She could not remember the last time she had seen so much in one place. He stepped aside and motioned toward it. "You should clean yourself. I'll wait outside." Her chest tightened in shock. The words felt sharp, almost painful, because no one had ever said them with kindness. Shame burned through her veins, hot and heavy. She lowered her eyes, afraid to move. "It won't matter," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The smell never leaves." She expected him to sigh, to grow angry, to push her out. Instead, he only said, "Then we'll try again tomorrow, and the day after, as long as it takes." The quiet certainty in his tone broke something inside her. She felt her throat close, her eyes blur. Her knees almost gave way beneath her, but she steadied herself on the wall. For the first time, someone had spoken to her as if she was not broken beyond repair. He left the shelter without another word, closing the door behind him. Lyra stared at the basin. The water reflected her face, thin, dirty, tired. She leaned closer, almost afraid of her own reflection. Then, with trembling fingers, she splashed the first handful onto her skin. The coolness shocked her body, running down her arms, carrying away layers of filth. She gasped, pressing her hands to her face, washing again and again. The water darkened as it hit the floor, filled with dirt that had clung to her for years. Her hands moved to her tangled hair, scrubbing until strands fell over her shoulders, clean and heavy. She poured water over her arms, her legs, her back, whispering to herself as if she could not believe it. "Gone. It's going." She rubbed until her skin burned, until the shame felt lighter with each drop. By the time the basin was nearly empty, her body shivered from the cold, but the air around her felt different. She stood, dripping, her clothes clinging, and for the first time in years, she did not smell her own curse pressing against her nose. She wrapped herself in a ragged cloth she found in the corner, clutching it tightly as if afraid the change would vanish. The door creaked open, and the man stepped back inside. He did not stare at her, did not mock her, did not even smile. His eyes softened, nothing more. He set a small bundle on the floor, clean clothes, worn but mended. "For you," he said simply. She pressed the cloth tighter around her chest, unable to speak. He turned his back to give her privacy, waiting in silence. When she dressed and stepped forward, her heart thundered. The clothes were too big, but they were clean, and for the first time she felt almost human again. He turned then, his gaze meeting hers. He nodded once. No words of praise, no empty kindness, just quiet acceptance. Her lips trembled and she whispered, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Her voice cracked on the last word. He studied her for a moment before answering. "Because no one else would." The simplicity of his answer struck harder than any kindness she had imagined. Lyra lowered her eyes, unable to stop the tears from slipping down her cheeks. She had thought herself cursed forever, abandoned by gods and people alike. Yet here in this broken shelter, with water dripping from her hair and new clothes clinging to her skin, she felt something she had forgotten long ago. She felt the first fragile shape of hope. The next morning, the market was alive with shouts and movement, but whispers rose louder than the cries of merchants when Lyra stepped through the gates. Faces turned, eyes narrowed, and mouths fell open in disbelief. She was still the same alien girl who had once been shunned, but the grime and filth that had hidden her were gone. Clean skin caught the light, her tangled hair now brushed into loose strands, and though her clothes were simple, they were whole. The smell that had once driven everyone back had faded, and the absence of it made the crowd uneasy. Some merchants muttered in confusion. "Is that her?" one asked, shielding his nose as if preparing for the same old curse. When no wave of foul stench reached him, his hand fell slowly, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Others frowned, convinced it was a trick. A guard stepped forward, sniffing the air dramatically, then scowled when nothing came. He spat on the ground and barked, "Doesn't matter, she's still cursed. You can't just wash that away." Lyra kept her eyes down, heart hammering as voices stabbed at her from every side. She felt their stares like knives pressing into her back. Shame threatened to pull her into the ground again, to make her curl up and disappear. But then she heard steady footsteps behind her. The man walked at her side, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, unshaken by the storm of whispers. His calm was a shield, invisible but strong, and though the crowd seethed, none dared to block his path. When she risked a glance at him, he met her eyes briefly. It was not a smile, not reassurance, only a look that said, "Keep walking." Her trembling eased, and she did. Children, braver than adults, edged closer, curious. One boy pointed at her and whispered too loudly, "She's not ugly anymore." His mother yanked him back, scolding him, her eyes full of fear. Another child giggled, reaching out as if to touch her sleeve, but the father dragged the child away, glaring at Lyra as though she were a poisonous creature. Every rejection cut, but none could erase the sound of those first innocent words, "Not ugly anymore." The man stopped at a stall where bread was sold. He bought 2 loaves without a word, handed one to Lyra, and kept the other for himself. The merchant accepted the coins but spat in the dust, muttering about humans wasting good money. Lyra took the bread with shaking hands, half expecting it to be snatched away, but no one touched her. She bit into it slowly, tasting not only food but the weight of something new, dignity. But dignity brought danger too. At the far end of the market, a group of guards gathered, their eyes locked on her. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his jaw, sneered openly. "So the human thinks he can change the outcast," he said, his voice carrying above the noise. "Wash a beast and it's still a beast." The others laughed. Lyra froze, her chest tightening as fear gripped her. The man at her side did not answer immediately. He finished his bread, wiped his hand, and then looked at the guard. His words came low but strong, enough for everyone nearby to hear. "If she is a beast, then I'll stand with her. What does that make me?" A heavy silence spread. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, no one daring to laugh after that. The scarred guard scowled, but he did not step closer. He spat once and turned away, muttering threats under his breath. For the first time, Lyra's chest filled not only with fear, but with something sharp and unfamiliar. Pride. He had spoken for her when no one ever had. He had not called her cursed, not mocked her, not tried to hide her. He had faced the scorn of many and still chosen to walk beside her. As the market noise slowly returned, Lyra pressed the bread to her chest, her eyes wet with silent tears. She could not speak, not yet, but inside she made a promise to herself. No matter what the world thought, she would not forget this moment. She would not forget the man who had refused to turn away even when the whole market demanded it. And though the crowd still saw her as an outcast, something had shifted. Whispers spread differently now, not only of disgust, but of doubt, of wonder, of fear that the cursed girl might not be cursed after all. That night, the shelter was quiet except for the wind rattling the loose metal sheets. Lyra sat near the small fire the man had built, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. The bread had filled her stomach, but the silence inside her felt heavier than hunger ever had. She wanted to speak, to ask him why he still stayed, why he had not walked away like everyone else, but the words stuck like thorns in her throat. The man was mending something in the corner, a torn strap from his pack. His movements were steady, unhurried, as if he belonged here and this moment was not strange at all. After a long pause, he asked without looking up, "What was your name before they called you cursed?" The question froze her. No one had asked her name in years. She had almost forgotten how it sounded when spoken aloud. Her lips parted, trembling, and she whispered, "Lyra." He nodded once, testing the strap with his hands. "Lyra," he repeated, simple and without judgment. The sound of it on another's tongue made her chest ache. She pressed her face against her knees, hiding the tears that spilled despite her will. "Why do you care?" she choked out. "I am nothing." His voice was calm, but each word struck deep. Nothing doesn't bleed. Nothing doesn't cry. Nothing doesn't fight to live another day. You're not nothing. Her tears fell faster, but she did not argue. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. She remembered her clan, the way they had turned their backs, the way her own mother had refused to touch her, covering her face with cloth whenever Lyra passed. She remembered sleeping outside in the rain, hearing their laughter while she shivered. For years she had believed their words. Cursed, filthy, unworthy. But sitting here now, with a man who did not flinch at her presence, the memory twisted. Maybe they had been wrong. She lifted her head slowly, her voice raw. It was an illness. My glands, they broke when I was young. The smell never left. They said it was punishment, that I would bring shame to the clan. They sent me away. Her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit her palms. I thought I would die quickly, but I didn't. I kept walking, and every place I went, they hated me. All of them. He listened without interruption, his hands still moving on the strap. When she finished, he set it aside and looked directly at her. You survived all of it. That makes you stronger than them. His gaze was steady, his tone certain, not like comfort but like fact. Her breath hitched. Stronger, the word felt foreign, unreal. She wanted to reject it, to say no. She was weak, broken, nothing. But another part of her clung to it desperately, like a drowning hand reaching for rope. The firelight danced on his face as he leaned back against the wall. Eat. Rest. Tomorrow, you'll walk again, not behind me, beside me. Her chest tightened, overwhelmed. She pressed her fingers to her lips to keep the sobs silent. No one had ever offered her such a place, not behind, not below, but beside. The night stretched long, but for the first time in years, she did not curl into herself, wishing for death. She lay on the floor near the fire, her body trembling with emotions she could not name. And as her eyes closed, she carried one fragile thought that refused to fade. If she was not nothing, then maybe, just maybe, she could learn to be someone again. The next day began with tension. As soon as they stepped beyond the shelter, eyes followed them like daggers. Traders muttered to one another, guards narrowed their eyes, and whispers ran through the market like wildfire. Lyra kept her gaze fixed on the ground, every step heavy with the weight of fear. She wanted to turn back, to crawl into the dark corner where no one could see her, but the man's steady stride pulled her forward. He did not slow, did not waver, as if the crowd was nothing more than dust in his path. At the edge of the square, 3 guards blocked the road. Their armor clanked as they shifted their weight, hands resting on their weapons. The scarred one from yesterday stepped forward, his lip curled. I warned you, human. This creature has no place here. Take her away, or we will. His words dripped with authority, loud enough for everyone to hear. The market stilled, the crowd waiting eagerly for the spectacle. The man's jaw tightened, but his voice came calm and cold. She goes nowhere, not unless she chooses to. Lyra's chest tightened at the sound of it. The guards glanced at each other, then laughed cruelly. You think you can stand against the law for a beast like her? The scarred guard lifted his hand to shove Lyra aside, and instinct made her flinch back. But the man's hand shot out, catching the guard's wrist in midair. The crowd gasped at the sudden grip, a sharp silence falling. The human's eyes burned with warning. Touch her again, he said, his voice low enough to shake bone, and I will break more than your pride. The guard tried to pull free, but the human's strength held him firm. For a moment, the market forgot to breathe. Then the guard ripped his hand back and spat, humiliated. You'll pay for this. No outsider stands against us without consequence. He turned sharply, his men following, but his glare lingered on Lyra with venom. The whispers erupted immediately, louder than before. Some voices were fearful, others mocking, some even curious. Why defend her? What is she to him? Madness. He'll be punished. Lyra trembled, shame and terror swirling together. She wanted to speak, to tell him he should leave her, that she was not worth this risk. But when she opened her mouth, nothing came. He looked at her once, and the certainty in his eyes silenced her doubts. Without a word, he continued walking, and she followed. When they reached the quieter edge of the town, her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered, her voice breaking. They'll come for you. You'll suffer because of me. He crouched beside her, his shadow falling across her trembling frame. Better me than you, he said firmly. They've already taken enough from you. His hand hovered near her shoulder but did not touch, waiting for her permission. For the first time, she did not flinch. Slowly, carefully, she let herself lean into that presence, her body shaking with silent sobs. She realized then what terrified her most was not the guards, not the hatred, not the threats. It was the thought of losing this strange human who saw her as more than cursed. The world might break them both, but for the first time she felt she would not face it alone. The night was colder than the last, the stars sharp and endless above the broken shelter. Lyra sat by the fire, her arms wrapped around herself, listening to the man prepare his bedroll. She could not sleep. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the scarred guard's face, the promise of punishment waiting for them. Fear clawed at her, but stronger still was the warmth inside her chest, the memory of his words, his defiance, the way he had stood between her and the world. She turned her gaze toward him, her voice trembling. "Why risk so much? You don't know me. I am no one." Her words hung heavy in the air. The man looked at her for a long moment, the firelight flickering across his face. Then he answered, steady as ever, "You are someone because I see you. That is enough." Her breath caught. She pressed her fingers to her lips, holding back the sob that rose. No one had ever said she was someone. To her clan, she had been a burden. To strangers, a curse. But here, in this fragile shelter, one man's voice carried the power to rewrite years of torment. The fire burned low as silence wrapped around them. Lyra closed her eyes, letting tears fall freely, not of shame this time, but of release. She felt the weight of years lifting, if only slightly. For the first time in her memory, she did not feel entirely alone. When dawn came, the world outside was restless. The guards had spread their warnings. Whispers of punishment ran through the market like smoke. Yet when the man opened the shelter door, he did not hesitate. He gestured for her to follow. She did. Her feet were unsteady, but her steps were hers. They passed through the streets together, the crowd parting with fear and anger. People muttered curses, others spat, but none dared to stand in their way. The scarred guard appeared at the edge of the square, his glare sharp as steel. Lyra froze, but the man's voice cut through her fear. "She walks with me." The guard sneered but did not move. His silence was forced, his power cracked. The crowd felt it too. For the first time, they saw not a cursed creature but a girl walking beside someone who refused to let her vanish. By the time they reached the far road, the whispers behind them had changed. They were no longer only of disgust. Curiosity, uncertainty, and even doubt lingered in the air. The curse was not so certain anymore. That evening, back at the shelter, Lyra stood by the basin. She dipped her hands into the water, watching her reflection ripple. Her hair lay clean on her shoulders, her skin no longer hidden by dirt. She looked like herself for the first time, though she did not yet know who that self truly was. She turned toward the man, her voice soft but steady. "You gave me back my name. You gave me back me." He shook his head gently. "You were always Lyra. I only reminded you." Her chest tightened as she stepped closer, her tears catching the firelight. She whispered, almost afraid of the words, "Then take me home." The man nodded once, without hesitation, as if the promise had already been made the moment he first stopped in front of her. And in that simple nod, her years of exile ended. The outcast had found her place, not through pity, not through miracle, but through one man's refusal to turn away.